One. Hey, good afternoon, Tim. Another Friday, another day for our podcast.
Good afternoon. How are you, Merv?
I'm good. I'm negotiating a good weather weekend. How's that?
Oh, that's beautiful. I did my negotiation outside with my weeds. I'm cleaning up the area around my sidewalk, and they have their idea of what a good time is, and I have my idea.
You said weeds, right?
Yes.
Well, if our audience hasn't picked up by now, we're going to be talking today. Our topic is going to be on negotiation, and particularly, I think we want to keep it within the overall topic of project management. But it's interesting how we tend to negotiate almost every single day and almost every single event that we happen to be in. And I was reminded yesterday, we were babysitting, my wife and I were babysitting our grandson. And towards the end of the day, his mother came to pick him up. Our daughter, his mother came to pick him up. And she said, "Okay, crew," his name is Crew, C-R-U. She says, "Okay, crew, it's time to go home." And he was watching one of his little math YouTubes. He said, "No, mommy, I have to finish this YouTube." And she said, no, we got to get going. "No, I want to finish this YouTube." And he negotiated, "Just give me a few more minutes." This is a 4-year-old. "Just give me a few more minutes, mommy, and then we can go." So she acquiesced.
Ooh, he had a negotiation with a transaction, with an offer for a transaction. That is awesome. It's part of our human nature to learn how to do this.
But here's the second part of our human nature. After the YouTube video was over and he learned to count by twos up to 20 or whatever it was, it shut down and he immediately started another YouTube. And his mother said, "Come on, we got to go." No, just one more YouTube. So
yeah, that's where the persuasion turns into manipulation.
There you go.
Where you're moving the goal line. But negotiation is everything, and it's part of our human nature. I was really lucky in my early career as a project manager because I was just inundated by all this formal training. I went under the CARIS School of Negotiation, and it was mostly contractual, but the teacher was fantastic. And they said, "You're doing this because we set this class up for this, but we talk to people who are talking people off of ledges. We're talking to people who are police officers. We're talking to people who are working in high crisis and high pressure work environments, and negotiation is negotiation. It's all the same."
Well, think of what we do on a daily basis on a project. We have our client people that are demanding in various ways their requirements be met. We have our own team with its own demands. We have as project managers, we have our senior management that we're beholden to. So it becomes almost a negotiation at an hour by hour level on a project.
And we always forget one negotiation. We have to negotiate with ourselves, or we're never going to have dinner with our family.
Exactly. Perfect example. But I was thinking, when I was thinking my example of my son, my grandson Crew, I was thinking, how often have I been on a project as a manager when my own staff would come to me and say, "I need Wednesday off. Can I have Wednesday? I promise I'll come in and work on Saturday. I just need Wednesday." You get these negotiation things all the time, it seems. And again, negotiation in this case was some sort of a transaction.
And we'll talk about strategies to manage these negotiations in a few minutes. But let's bottom out. What do you let's have two definitions for negotiation. Let's just have a natural or a normal everyday definition. Let's have a formal definition so that we understand, what we're talking about here. What's your take on what negotiation really is?
I would say it's some sort of coming together to reach an agreement. I think it's as simple as that, a discussion, some sort of communication that is intended to reach an agreement where both sides are hopefully satisfied.
Yes, agreement. It's funny because satisfaction is not part of the formal definition.
Formal. There you go.
You nailed it, because the formal definition says you have a discussion and you reach an agreement. That's what negotiation is. You basically come to a similar mindset, which is a miracle in
Yeah.
some ways. If we really study communication, it's a miracle that we can agree at all, much less agree on what words mean, like orange and happy. But yeah, go ahead.
No, think of even just the times when pre-COVID, when we actually met together in offices. Just think of how often we would have to have discussions to reach an agreement just on where to go for lunch as a team, let alone, negotiating with a client over some feature that needs to be put in, and how deep and how deep that feature has to be when it's implemented. I mean, there's all kinds of
and just because it's informal doesn't mean it's easy.
Right.
Some of the most complex negotiations I've had is when I've had a boss call me up and say, Tim, I know we were supposed to talk, but I don't have time. Do you have anything you need to cover? That's hard.
It's hard, yeah.
Because number one, yes, I'm going to use every moment of my time to make you aware of the work I'm doing. Yes, there are some priority things, and I probably don't have enough time to talk about the things that are the highest priority. So yes, I'm important. Now, the question is, I'm a project manager, and I know in everybody's mind, we all have different sets of priorities, and I know my boss doesn't have time to have that discussion. Here's my priorities. Here's your priorities. Let's go ahead and logically discuss this. See, that's where we get into trouble, and we get into the wrong side of negotiation, and we give in when we should be actually holding our grounds.
Well, and I'm wondering, now that you said that, how often did your boss use that tactic so that he would put you in a position whereby there would be almost like a win-lose transaction where he would win because
he got value and I didn't.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you're working with contracts, there is a transaction. And if you want to be fair in transactions, you say, let's evaluate the value of both sides, and let's make the exchange once we agree that there's fair value in exchange. And that's the only way you can get to win-win.
So we have the formal definition in terms of, I think you said discussion, which is aimed at getting to an agreement. How about informally? Is there an approach that you use or a definition that you would use that's not dictionary based?
Yeah, I actually use it at a broader level, where negotiation is basically getting somebody to understand my viewpoint. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily having the agreement. I think I think negotiation is not just coming to an agreement. I think it is, coming to an understanding of each side.
And I like to say, and sometimes you can't reach an agreement, but you still work together to achieve the best possible outcome.
Yeah.
There's not a full agreement.
That's beautiful. I was going to bring this up anyway. There's a concept in project management called consensus. And if you don't actually agree on the outcome, you can actually agree to support the direction of the group.
That's true, because after all, your side of what you believe should have been the agreement may in fact be not beneficial for the project or for what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Right. It gets out of the whole debate of the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. Yeah. And it maintains the continuity of the group and the progress, while it allows for innovation and the individuality of the individual. And so consensus is a mechanism that you can use to successfully navigate complex negotiations.
Well, what about the fact then? So we talked about what negotiation is, but in the heat of a project, have you ever come across situations or items on the project that are just not negotiable at all?
Oh,
You
yeah.
ever,
It's called authoritarianism. Safety
oh yeah.
and legal
Mhm.
and other ethical considerations that the organization will not budge on, the business requirement components. Yeah, there are non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And hopefully, hopefully at the beginning of the project, in the beginning of the relationship, we've set up a team charter and an understanding that we've established a culture that says, we're going to have non-negotiables, we're going to have negotiables, and we're going to agree that we have some way to quickly decide which category we're in so we can move quickly. It's the only way you can actually, have an effective and proactive team.
Yeah, and I think also in addition to a team charter, which is kind of more closely held within the team or within a broader team, but I think also just an overall project charter, which involves the sponsors, I think is important as well, because the sponsors will definitely have non-negotiables. My management may have some non-negotiables, but we have to understand what those are going in to avoid the arguments that will eventually happen if we don't understand what those non-negotiables are.
Yeah, one of the most common questions I get in my classes, we start talking about the project charter, and I say it establishes the approval of the project and it establishes the authority of the project manager, the two mechanisms that the charter supports. It
Yeah.
is the decision, right? We have a project. The one of the most common questions I get is, are you allowed to change the charter? And my answer is a qualified yes. And I give them two things. Number one, predicated by the ability to stop work, and we can stop work and we can discuss, because the charter is the document that initiates the objective. And if you're changing why you're doing the project, anything and all can change. And so you have to understand the impact of something that large. Second of all, you have to understand that all parties discussing this are open to all avenues of the outcome of discussing why. Like, we may need to close this project early. We may need to default on loans. And we need to have that discussion. And this cannot be a scary discussion. This has to be a realistic one.
Yeah, rational discussion based on events that happened. I mean, my last project before I officially retired was with an institution that required all of the vendor team, and I was part of the vendor team, to be on site. We had to have our own accommodations within X miles of the client accommodations, and we had to be able to accommodate each other at each other's site. That was a non-negotiable in the contract. Well, guess what happened in March of last year? COVID. Suddenly the non-negotiable in terms of getting the project completed suddenly became negotiable. And it's interesting, within 3 days, they moved from having to be on site to being completely cloud-based, and they didn't lose a beat. They did not lose a single beat. And people were working the projects all the way from India, based on their time zone, and across probably all 4 time zones within the US, and still managed to keep up and get the job done. But that non-negotiable ended up being non-negotiable because of a larger problem with it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And as a project manager, you can't shirk your duties
Right.
to actually bring up these huge, huge monsters and be able to use ration and analysis and debate to effectively manage these. It's a real world we live in. You know, it's like Apollo 13 over again. We got to do something. And if nobody else is going to move, we have to be the ones who move first.
Yeah. And you know, this may be something that you may want to add to some of your classes when you're teaching negotiation, but I remember very specifically how absurd things can get sometimes. We were involved in a fairly large bid to an organization that had very strict requirements. We bid some product, some hardware, a hardware product that was the kind of the best of the best at that time, or we believed so. Well, the negotiations and the contract terms took so long for whatever reason, and I can't even describe for the reason, that the hardware that we bid became obsolete. And there was a better version of the hardware that was now being produced by the company that was supplying the hardware. The entity that we were negotiating with canceled the contract because we could no longer provide the hardware that we had bid, even though we offered at no extra cost to provide the new improved version. So negotiations can become absurd also based on non-negotiable rules.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah. And we have to separate the process from the outcome and realize the process only exists because there is a potential for a favorable outcome.
Right.
Do you have any general rules, or how do you go about negotiating?
Well, fortunately, from a contract perspective, I typically haven't done a lot of it. I typically have been involved in bids, and those that we won just got done the work. And so there may have been day-to-day negotiations in terms of priorities and that sort of thing. But when I have been involved in some heftier negotiations, it's been always to strive for, I think my number one principle is to strive for that win-win. And I noticed this for myself, that whenever I'm into a situation where I'm talking to the person on the other side of the negotiation, for some reason, and I don't know if I've got this natural empath version of me or something, but I always put myself in their shoes and think, if I really push this, what does that do to them? And so I think for my own self, and maybe I've lost a few really good things in terms of, you know, giving in based on putting myself in their shoes, but I think the win-win is more, the relationship may become more important than winning that one single item.
It does. It does. It does. And it's not just the relationship, it's the ethics.
Yeah.
It basically, you lose grounding in the things that you base your life on. And when you give up your values, you give up that anchor to who you are. I've been in negotiations where I was pushed into a position where I was asked to release some of my personal values, and it was like I had an upset stomach and I didn't sleep for 3 or 4 nights, but then 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, I knew I made the right decision.
Yeah. You know, to kind of give an example of what I just talked about outside of the project realm, my wife and I are remodeling a couple, 2 bathrooms actually in a rental home that we happen to own. And what ended up happening was the person who's coming in after the plumber is delayed. So now the plumber can't start on the second bathroom. They finished the first bathroom, they can't start on the second until, anyway, there's a long story, but here's what happened. In negotiating that, I had negotiated a single price for the full job. And I decided I was going to put myself in the plumber's shoes. He's a small outfit. I called him up and I said, you know what, send me a bill for the first half. Let's get that out of the way, and I'll let you know as soon as the second bathroom is ready to be remodeled. Because I felt it wasn't fair. Even though we'd negotiated a single payment at the end of the job, I felt it wasn't fair to have him hanging out for those few weeks for the full payment. So I think that may be where some of my empath comes from in terms of these types of situations.
Yeah, and what you're doing is you're offering a concession with extra value that is non-monetary, that actually is preferable. If you can't give more money, you can give it at a more equitable time, which these things are easy. They're easy giveaways. And the thing is, you have to slow down and think these things through in order to do them.
But think about the next job. When I need someone the next time, do you think I might have him being much more responsive than the stereotypical response of plumbing organization is? I think so.
Exactly. Now, and this is why I support other people winning when I win, because if they get enough experience with that, number one, they're going to come to me when they want to win. Number two, it scales a lot better than win-lose.
Yeah.
You have a 50% chance of losing when you go into a win-lose, but in a win-win, not only do you scale well, but there's a broader uptick on the scale. For instance, if I'm hunting rabbits and you're hunting rabbits, this is the deer hunt, which is a model for win-win. The problem is, the more rabbits I get, the less rabbits you get, right? But if we're together hunting for a deer, I don't get a rabbit for a day. I get half of a deer for a week. And both you and I get to sit with our families for a week and eat really well before we have to come out. And we're going to look for each other and do it again. Now, here's the thing. No, it moves the game. Risk in hunting rabbits is you may get the rabbit and I don't. Risk in win-win is the trust we invest into the relationship. And so you have to understand and manage the risk in a conscious manner. And that way you can take advantage of this, not just in negotiation, but the outcome.
So can I offer a public service announcement for 2 seconds here?
Sure.
For all of our people who are listening right now who are vegetarian, please continue to listen. That was only an analogy.
Yeah, it's from a 16th century philosophical model.
No, I agree. I agree 100%.
Yeah, and it is beautiful. It's beautiful. How do you go about doing negotiation? How do you?
Before we go there, I want to bring up one other one. Well, maybe several, but I think one other one that's just as important to me anyway as the whole win-win. That listening, that striving for that win-win. I think is the listening piece. What I have observed negotiations where people interrupt each other, and I think that interruption comes as a result of wanting to make their side heard and wanting to make their side win, essentially. But what I found, if I listen carefully, actively, not passively, active listening without interruption, let the other person be completely heard before I speak, it's amazing how different that negotiation goes. I don't know if you've ever experienced that.
Yes, I have many times.
Yeah.
And it also is very effective in meetings. For instance, if I'm a leader in the meeting and I say something, everybody else thinks that that's the decision. I've just cut everybody else off. So whenever I'm in a room and I'm a leader, I always intentionally ask questions and I reserve my comments and my words for the last part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Second of all, which is even more important, silence.
Yes. I was just going to
yeah.
I was just going to say that the part about listening without interruption, I have now given that person permission to listen to me without interruption. And then when I stop, I don't add anymore because, I think you were going to say this, silence for a lot of people is very uncomfortable. And so they have to keep talking and keep talking and keep talking, right?
Yes. It's one of my more negative tactics when I've gone into a consulting gig and I'm needing to explore things, and they're saying something, but it doesn't add up.
Mhm.
I ask an open-ended question, and then I just let that silence become very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And they will tell me exactly what the real problem is.
exactly.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Human nature is so predictable. It's wonderful. I may have talked about this in the show. Silence is one of my major strategies in negotiation, like public assaults. You're not just playing the notes, you're playing the silence. And it's the combination of the notes and silence that makes good music. And it's a combination of the words and the silence that actually makes a good conversation.
Well, and it's not a negative tactic either, because you have said your piece. You are now listening for the other person to respond. And if the silence is there, just let the silence go. That person will eventually respond to support their side of the situation. So the other thing that I've used, and we'll get on to your next question here shortly, but the other thing I've used is I've observed the other person, their style. And then I have found that if I accommodate my style to their style, and not necessarily mirroring their style, but accommodating their style, I also find that to be an effective gambit when negotiating, even in minor situations.
This is funny. I've studied adopting cultures. How do you go into another corporate culture or another national culture or just human group cultures, right? How do you go in and start building effective relationships? And one of the most critical components is what you just talked about. You don't come in with your culture first. You come in understanding their culture, their language, their mores, their mindset, and you start speaking their language first. It makes people more relaxed and comfortable. They're open up to more discussion, and they're more interested in sharing. I would always bring engineers to my engineering discussions with clients. I'd always bring my business analysts to business discussions.
Yeah.
And it only sets things on a comfortable footing. And that's one of the keys is, can I get as much information as I can before I walk into a conversation or into a negotiation?
Yeah. And I think the other important part, we've talked, I think we did a whole podcast once on emotional intelligence. I think negotiations is the perfect place to have your emotional intelligent framework at its peak, because if you lose track of your emotions, if you don't recognize other person's meaning, if you don't control your own emotions, is probably what I should say, you lose. And I'm talking about win-lose in that situation. You lose.
Right, right. If you don't have a good handle on how you manage relationships, if you don't have a good handle on your emotions, you cannot have a positive outcome. And this is conversations, this is negotiation, this is anything to do with humans.
Yeah. Now you started asking me a question before I kept going on the previous one, because I was really enjoying the previous discussion.
Oh no, this is a wonderful conversation. We could talk about negotiation forever. What are the general steps you go through when you negotiate?
I tell you, the first, when I do, and again, I have to confess, I haven't done a lot of high level, significant, huge $100 million contract. I haven't done a lot of that, but I have done day-to-day negotiations with my client, with my staff, with my executive. So I think the very first thing, if I know that I'm going into a negotiation situation, is I find a quiet place and I plan ahead. I start to think, if I say this, what if she says this? If I offer this, what if she offers that? Just to kind of play it out in my mind and thinking through what I absolutely cannot give up and how to work through that, and what I'm willing to let go of, should they ask for it, but still hang on to the things that are, in this case, again, in my non-negotiables. How about yourself?
That's the same. That's the same. That's the very first step. Number one, plan and prepare. Know what you're going into. And just to add a little finesse to what you're talking about, be ready for alternatives. Be ready for what's the best of all possible worlds, an outcome for me and an outcome for them. And what's the worst of all possible worlds for them and me as well. So we can actually look at our boundary conditions and see how our boundary conditions or our acceptable outcomes map. And that tells me what, generally we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
Another one is setting ground rules.
I
How
never
we're
thought
going
of
to
that.
argue, how we're going to argue, how we're going to debate, what's not on the table, what is on the table. I've done some silly things. Is there anything else, Tim, that you want to have in the contract? And I would say, I once said, well, every Friday at 2 p.m., I want somebody to hand me a hamburger standing on one foot. And it took them 2 minutes to realize I was being silly. And I said, oops. And it's funny. When you get into negotiations, you're in a certain mindset, and it really does take a little bit of maturity as well as discipline.
Well, and I think that, what you said is very important. And I never thought of that before. Setting ground rules, I've thought of, but setting ground rules in terms of what is not on the table becomes important. And I'm reminded of some stereotypical jokes of marriage where the couple gets into a situation where they're not agreeing on something, and suddenly events from 6 years ago come into the situation. So that's not fighting fair. That's not negotiating fair. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing you're saying. There are certain parts of negotiation that should not be involved in this process because they are off the table.
See, that's the beautiful thing about a scope statement. We build a scope statement and we say that's all we're going to do. That is everything. But it defines 50% of the reality we're not talking about. It also defines everything else we're not going to have. And we have to treat it as such. Like I said, alternatives are your saving grace as a project manager, and using them effectively doesn't just say this is what we're discussing. It also says this is what we're not discussing.
Yeah.
There's a third step. There's actually 5 steps. If you study negotiation, there's 5 formal steps you go through. The third one is what you talked about: clarify and justify. Right? You clarify and give your reason for what you believe is the outcome to be agreed upon. Right? And you lay it down on the table, understanding that it is your opinion, and then understanding that 2 minds working together create something better than 2 minds in isolation.
That's true. Or 2 minds in conflict.
Yeah.
So just remind me, number 1 was plan ahead.
Yep. Plan and prepare. The other
Plan
one
and
is
prepare.
define the ground rules.
Okay, define ground rules. Yeah, that's good. And then this third one.
And then clarify and justify, and then bargain and problem solve.
Okay.
Is number 4.
Problem solving. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've found that if people really want to work together, they're going to find a way. And I use this as an example. The house is on fire. The front door is blocked and the back door is blocked. And all of a sudden, everybody remembers the kitchen window is right here. And these little tiny innovations in a negotiation often come up if you are negotiating the right outcome. Now, if you're not negotiating the right outcome, that's when you notice that people are disengaged.
But who doesn't love a problem solver? I think part of my success when I went independent as a consultant in IT, part of my success was no matter what the situation that was brought to me, I would listen actively, and then I would help solve the problem. Not that this is the way it has to be done, but let's look at this. Let's look at it from this side. And it's interesting how people are attracted to you because you're helping them solve their problem.
Right. And that's the objective of consulting. Consulting starts with project management, and instead of a deliverable, consulting says we're going to deliver a solution, which means, and this is the verbiage of the 1980s and 1990s. Okay, so it's a little dated, but it says that we're not just delivering something that functions. We have something that has actual value. It serves a purpose, it solves a problem, it alleviates stress. And that's the beauty of projects. They are a way to control change successfully and also provide not just functionality, but value.
Great. I can't wait to hear number 5.
Close and implement.
Close and implement.
It's basically formally recognizing that we do have an agreement here, and we take that agreement into action.
You know, it's interesting. I just got off, just before this podcast, I just got off another remote call. And it's interesting. I was watching the other side. It wasn't a negotiation, but it was kind of a coming together to move forward. But I was watching the other side, and as they prepared to close, they went back and they summarized all of the points. And then they said, we'll send this out to you and let us know what we have captured incorrectly or correctly. Let us know. So it's interesting that became their close. That became their position, right? He who writes the rules basically makes the rules, kind of thing. But it's a very effective tactic, because everyone else in the meeting said, yeah, send those to me. I want to look them over to make sure that I can comply as we go forward.
See, this is the beautiful thing about negotiation. It drives agreement. And if you write it down, you have a written permanent record of here is a point we did agree.
Yeah.
Now, this is what a project manager craves, because now I can say if something's different, I can go back to that point and find out what changed, what was the driver that took us out of agreement. And I can do some root cause analysis. It's not to make people wrong per se, it's to actually find out what are the drivers that are keeping us from our perceived success.
Yeah. So let me offer something slightly different from your 5. I'm going to call your 5A.
Okay.
And I'm going to offer an alternative called 5B. So 5A was close and implement. How about 5B? The alternate to that is be prepared to walk away.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. And actually, I agree with you totally. And in contract negotiations, a measure of a very confident vendor is somebody who's willing to walk away from this contract. Because if by doing that, they're saying, I don't need your business, you may need me, but I have 5 or 6 people lined up. And when you have somebody who's willing to walk away and is able to state such, you probably have a reasonably healthy company, if not a mature negotiator.
Yeah, I agree. And you don't want to ever do that in an arrogant fashion, but you do want to be prepared to say, I can go somewhere else. That's not an issue for me right now, but let's see if we can get to an agreement, because I really do want to work with you. So I think there's ways to do that, but always be prepared to walk away. I remember when my wife and I were young, our kids were still young, and we loved to do road trips. And so we decided we're going to buy a brand new, I think in those days, the popular one was called the Dodge Caravan. I don't know if you remember that vehicle.
I sure do.
And what we wanted was the 2 separate seats in the back, so that the kids, I don't know if you remember road trips when you were a kid, but the refrain was always, stop touching me, stop touching me.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So,
oh, yeah.
So we wanted these captain's chairs in the back. Well, I did my, think about this. I did my planning. I did my research. I did everything you're supposed to do before I went into the dealership that was advertising this brand new Dodge Caravan. And it's interesting how, because I was prepared beforehand, including some prices from competitors, including some, the MSRP, those sorts of things. It's amazing how much better position that put me in when the sales, and they used every tactic. Well, I can't make that deal. Let me call my boss. So the boss comes in. Well, I can't make that deal. Let me call my boss. So he comes in. And I remember at one time, we weren't arriving at a price. I looked at my wife. I said, okay, we're going to go, because the next person I see in here, and I'll tell you how long ago this was, the next person I see in here will be Lee Iacocca. And quite frankly, I'm not ready for that negotiation. So I got up and left. And all of a sudden, they agreed to my price. But because I was planned, ready, and also ready to walk away, I did achieve. Now they got a fair price. I got a fair price. In my way, we both won. But it's amazing how, if you're not prepared, you can get taken advantage of.
Yes, 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 indeed. And not only that, there's the fun aspect of negotiation.
Ah, yes.
And this is what I've discovered. If you start really getting good at negotiation, it's not fun to negotiate with somebody who doesn't know the rules or doesn't know how to do it in a mature manner. It's like you can pretty much read them and you understand going in this, they're not ready to have this discussion. And I've had to walk away from a lot of clients because of this. You go in and they're disorganized, they don't know what they want. And I know it's going to take me 6 to 8 hours to help them prepare to negotiate, much less be able to decide whether or not we can help them.
As you were saying that, I was smiling because I was in a situation similar to, it was a project situation, but it was a negotiation on, I think it was on a feature or something that had to be left out, I think, in order for us to implement timely. And I remember sitting down with this person and they were not prepared to negotiate back and forth. So I would make my point and then I would say, okay, this is where you say this. And so even though it wasn't fun because they weren't prepared, it was fun because I got to coach them into an agreement that was good for both of us.
Yeah. I know those conversations too well. Let's talk about the triple constraint. You go in there and they say, I want it now, I want it cheap, and I want it fancy. And you're going to be spending an hour and a half helping them understand that each one of those statements is going to either go with one other statement or block both of the others. And that is an extended conversation that is you're going to be spending time, not just through the negotiation, to help them understand what their desires are creating, but at the same time, even after you agree what they want, they're not going to be satisfied. And so it really is tough when you work with people and they are not ready to be open to this type of an education.
Well, and there's the old adage, and I've used this in project situations. As they wanted, I think you said the triple, what did you say, the triple threat?
The triple constraint, yeah.
Constraints. The way I've heard it is we want it faster, we want it better, and we want it cheaper. And I would say, absolutely, pick two because you can't have three.
Yeah.
Because if you want it faster and better, it won't be cheaper. If you want it faster and cheaper, it won't be better. And if you want it better and cheaper, it won't be fast. The whole idea, you can't have all three. So yeah, there's a way of also logically approaching that sort of negotiation.
Now, in a bad way, you're going to be spending time educating them on the impact of their desires. Now, in a good way, they've given you information. They've given you an understanding of their mindset, their organization's mindset. They're giving away too much information that they may not have been ready for. I've had clients who said, I don't have time to work with you. That's great. Your organization's disorganized. You don't know how to manage. Tell me when you're ready. They've told me too much information. And in a negotiation, if you lock down your mind, and if you have an opinion or perception, like you talked about earlier in this show about active listening, if you
Mhm.
don't employ active listening, you're not getting all these grains of wisdom that they're providing you by inadvertently saying these things off the cuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is fun. This is the fun part. The fun part is working with people, and it's getting people to understand what this is.
Yeah. And the not fun part is working with people who feel that the only way they win is if you lose.
Right, right.
The whole zero fun, the whole zero sum process, that is not fun.
Yeah, there's no competition in
Right.
negotiation. It can't be,
Yeah.
because in the end, like you say, in the end, there's always a we.
Yeah.
And whether it's project work or organizational work or relationship work, there's not me, my, and yours.
Yeah.
There's
Exactly.
always a we, and that's all that exists.
So what if you're in a situation where both of you don't win, or one of you doesn't win just because of the way the circumstances unfold? Do you think there's ever a positive outcome to that?
There can be. There can be. Number one, educational. Both sides can actually do it. And Voss and Karras say that if there's a negative outcome and somebody loses, it means that both sides did not work hard enough at the negotiation. And I believe it. And there's education in it.
Yeah.
Number two, it's fate. And there are things that happen outside of our control. And what you need to understand is, how did this occur? Was it fate? Was it luck? Was it COVID that hit and changed the rules of the game, and therefore one lost and the other won?
Yeah.
And you have to be ready to go back to that and say, okay, this isn't because somebody did something. This wasn't malicious. This is just the nature of how life works sometimes.
Or, or it could be something along the lines of opening up the newspaper one day and finding out that your competitor's senior executive was golfing with your potential client's senior executive the day before the bid was evaluated. That happened to me. That was a negative outcome, but I'll tell you what the positive outcome of that was. We lost the bid. I don't know if it had anything to do with that golf game. Have no idea, not insinuating. It just, the optics were bad. But I'll tell you that we won anyway, because by losing the bid, the competitor went in there and unfortunately so severely underbid it that they ended up losing their shirts and took themselves out of the competition for the next couple of years for other bids. So
Yeah.
sometimes you lose, sometimes you win by losing.
It's the long game. It's the strategy. And the long game always supports win-win. Unintended consequences are oftentimes win-lose or lose-lose scenarios. It's, oops, neither one of us actually thought about this.
Right.
It's like you said, the hardware became obsolete. Oops, we didn't predict that. And that's not human error. That's a system error. It may not even be an error. It's just the nature of technology to evolve so quickly that it outpaces the purpose of contracts.
Yeah, and the reason I brought that particular example forward, because the absurdity was in the process rules that were non-negotiable. Had they allowed the process to take place, they would have gotten better hardware at the same price. So that's the absurd side of, you're right. That was the IT part was out of our control. The hardware was obsolete, but the process part could have been fixed and it wasn't. So.
Right, exactly. I've been accused of being too optimistic or being a spin doctor, because I take this opinion that, you take care of people, you're going to get better results. There are some things that happen, and if you're on the losing side, next time you'll win. Or maybe it's just that there were stuff outside of your control and there's nothing you could have possibly done. And why worry about it? And
Yeah.
again, I've been accused of being Pollyannish. It's not that. It's being terribly pragmatic, because in a negotiation, if you find out you've lost, you can't really say, let's unnegotiate.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
Well, and even in situations where they allow a protest, protest all you want, but if you, let's say you win the protest, then you've already started off on a negative foot. So who
Right.
wants to work on a project for the next 2 years negatively when in a negative situation when the client in fact wanted your competitor? I mean, it just comes down to, yeah, let things go sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we have to remember that a contract is not just a commitment and obligation with an exchange. It also defines a relationship.
Yeah.
And you're defining the relationship that you're going to have for an extended amount of time. And we have to realize, not just in the negotiations, but on our actions throughout the relationship, we're defining how that relationship is going to evolve.
That just reminded me of something I read from, it was Chris Voss. You mentioned Chris Voss earlier. I think it was, yeah, it's something that he had written. I remember reading, and he said there's 3 types of negotiators. One is the assertive one, and he or she will win, period. They have the ability to say no, but I'm going to win. It's kind of one of those people. It's the assertive person. He also talked about the analyst. They're going to win, but they're going to do it, not so much in your face, right? They're going to do it in such a way that you feel a little better about the situation, but they're still going to win. But the third one, and this is the one that I like, it's the accommodator. And here's the key, I think, what he talked about with the accommodator that made me realize how you can be likable in a negotiation, strive for win-win, and come out better for both parties. And that is that the accommodator wants to be liked, and to intentionally apply, those emotional intelligence sort of thing. That's the overall best approach. But there's being liked is a good asset, while needing to be liked is a vulnerability.
Yes.
I love that. I love the way he presented that.
Yeah. And again, that's we're getting away from negotiation into persuasion, which I really enjoy talking to you about in the future.
Yeah.
Persuasion can often be used in negotiation. And it's the use of emotions and logic and ethics to attempt to get somebody into an agreement with you. And again, this is not something devious. It's actually, like you said, it can be very pragmatic and very open and transparent, where we say, here's all the data. Let's debate. You give me your side, I'll give you my side. We'll go ahead and weigh both sides.
Well, the person that Chris Voss described as the accommodator, who is the liked negotiator, I think it is absolutely fair. In fact, I think it's incumbent on that person to be persuasive, because often, and I'm thinking from a project management perspective, a lot of times we come in as IT problem solvers. We understand technology. We don't understand every nuance of their business, but we do understand how technology improves business in most cases. And so because we know that, it is incumbent upon us as accommodator negotiators to work with that client to persuade them to understand how they can be helped and come to a conclusion, come to a win-win conclusion.
This is where, in negotiation, it's much like persuasion. If you're trying to propose something that somebody wants, you need 3 things. You need logic, something that's really simple. You need to do your research, and you need something called conviction. If you don't believe in your side, you have no right to be at the negotiation table.
That's absolutely wise. Yes.
And yeah, let's think about talking about persuasion in a few weeks. I know we have other things to talk about, and my students and the public are always giving us things to talk about. But yeah, let's start talking about that, because we have I think we have some things here we'd like to follow up on.
Yeah, I agree. But let's do this. In the 2 minutes or so that we have left, have you ever been in a negotiation where a direction took an absolute bad turn, perhaps for both of you?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. For many reasons. Technological, like you said, business decisions where we were offering a solution that was antithetical to the direction of the business of one of our clients. I was personally supportive of an initial investment that the organization did not want to take, and I was not privy to their strategy, and so I blew the negotiation there. And yeah, it could have gone in a real south direction if I would have held to my guns. Oftentimes, yeah. And again, I treat all of these not as failures but as mistakes, because once I went through that, I was never going to do it again.
Yeah, I had a situation. I remember probably several, but I remember one time very directly. I'd worked a contract for an organization. I was there for 4 years, helping them to work with their vendor and get their product, and we implemented. I finished my contract. I left that organization and got another contract in a similar, a sister organization, and was working there. Well, when the second contract ended, the first client asked me to come back. We negotiated a rate. I came back, and as I settled into my office on the first day, the procurement analyst came down and said, unfortunately, what we negotiated, we can't negotiate with you as a single proprietor. We have to bring you through one of our approved vendors that's already on our vendor list. And so I said, that's fine. I'll still work with you. Unfortunately, when they brought me through their approved vendor, they wanted a 40% cut of my rate.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So right then and there, I could have walked, because that was breaching my agreement with this organization. We ended up coming up with a much more healthy, all they're doing was taking the check from the organization and passing me my piece. So why would they take 40% for that when I was the one that the organization wanted? So we ended up coming to a conclusion. I did not walk because I felt an allegiance to this client. And I felt like them having called me back to work with them for another couple of years was worth the time that I was spending with them to make their implementation even better. So ethically, morally, all of those good things, I suppose you can say, wrapped up into my decision, even though it did cut into my pay. But, at some point, life and relationship is more important than that paycheck.
Fulfillment and satisfaction often does not have a dollar value. You're right.
That's exactly correct. Well, good. Where can we find you this week, Tim?
I'm out on LinkedIn. I'm still working on some major projects here that I'm wrapping up. If you say hi to me, it's going to take me a week to get back to you. But at the same time, please reach out. And if you want me to respond to something or just ask specifically, and the precision of your question will give you the precision of the answer.
Yeah, and me likewise myself likewise on LinkedIn. Just you can find me there as Merv Jersak, or as People First Project Management. But same thing with Tim. We're busy, but we're always available. In fact, I just helped a person from overseas, and I say overseas from America, from North America. Just helped them with part of a PhD thesis. So it's just we're out there. We're helpful. We want to help. We want to be cognizant that other people respect what we have done in our careers and that we have some things to offer. So we appreciate your listening to us. We appreciate you being here every week, and we'll catch you on the flip side.
Thanks again, Merv, and thanks everybody who's tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.
Next week.